incumbents, this is a question for you. What's the most important legislation you've proposed during your time as a city councillor, and why?
To ask what specific item has been the most important that I've done is a wide-ranging number, because a lot of the items that I've docketed and put before the City Council have been things that impact the residents in particular. And one of the key ones that I came into when I came into the City Council was there was a surplus of the property at Crescent Street. The city was surplus in some park and recreation property, and it had already been surplused out, and it was out of the city's hands. It was going to a development project that wasn't in line with what the residents of West Newton were looking for. So I was able to come back in, showing real quick that I was a good negotiator amongst my colleagues and the neighborhood, and I was able to bring the Crescent Street project back into the City Council so we could then reestablish the conversation and discuss the merits of doing something different with it. So currently the Crescent Street property, we had a project that went through, it got turned down, got approved, then got turned down. So it sits today as open space, but again, as a negotiating piece for me, I'll be negotiating that against some of the other projects in the city for open space. So my goal to that one would be that continues to be open space in a park. So that's one of the key ones, but it just shows that a lot of the items that I bring in impact the residents. Currently, I just docketed an item to enhance the revenue from different directions for the Parks Department so we can pay for fields and athletic facilities. Thank you.
Okay. Who's the challenger here? Both. Pam. Okay, so Pam, for you, what's your top legislative priority and why?
So I became involved or decided to run on the whole zoning issues. And the big one I see is next year is the rezoning of the city and adding density everywhere. When I started reading the documents, there's a lot of things that they want to try to do, and there are good thoughts in it, but how they're going about doing it, I think, is poorly done. And I wanted to be part of that to make sure that it's a good document, the rezoning for the city. And I would like to see more input from the residents when we do go through that zoning.
All right, and so Andrea, let's hear from you. What's your legislation that you've been associated with, let's say, and as priorities for the future?
Oh, and priorities, we get to do that one too? Okay.
Yeah.
I missed the forward-thinking part, which I'm glad to hear about that. I'm still a new councillor in my first term, and it took about 6 months to get the hang of it, so I think I have less that I've docketed than Councilor Cote and some of the previous other candidates who have been on for a long time. But climate change and environmental sustainability is a very important topic for me. So one example, I've co-docketed several items by some of our other climate change leaders, like Councilor Leary, Councilor Norton. One I'll talk to is about restricting the use of polystyrene products. I think our approach to climate change has to be both small incremental everyday changes like not using straws as well as big ones. So the polystyrene ban was an important one for me. Going forward, I too plan to stick with zoning redesign and zoning reform because we definitely need a clearer set of zoning ordinances.
All right, which brings us to the category planning and development. So there's approximately 5,000 people per square mile, and Newton's population density is currently about 2/3 of that of the City of Boston. Mm-hmm. Do you support residential development that further increases Newton's population density, and if so, by how much? Or to put it another way, Newton's population is about 90,000. What do you think would be an ideal population for Newton, and why? So let's start again at this end with.
Okay. Thank you. So it's a very interesting question, and it's one that it's more theoretical than it is practical because you can't really nail down a number. Because if I was to say, I think 100,000 is fine, that defines a market that then defines the property values into the future. So I don't think we should be putting ourselves in that predicament. Now, looking at density, well, we represent Ward 3. So Ward 3 is probably the densest part of the city. We can actually walk our entire ward, whereas if you go out to the councils out in 6, 7, and 8, they have to drive around to meet their ward. So we understand density in West Newton, something we work with on a daily basis. My consistent approach since I've been on the city council and coming onto the city council was that I didn't have a big problem when we were developing on existing footprints where there had been previously large buildings in the past. Families are different size today, so my focus today on developments that come in is I'd like to have a positive approach when people come in and say, look, there's somebody coming in to invest in the city of Newton. let's get a good city council together to negotiate. I think Andrea and I have proved that we collaborate and negotiate very well with the developers. There's actually nothing on the horizon right now nailed down, except for that one project on the barn, and we'll negotiate that one to be the correct package.
Andrea?
I agree with all the previous speakers, including Jim and people who came before us, that there's not a magic answer to this question. I don't think it's a numerical question. My goal is not to increase the density or the population of Newton specifically, but to help guide change and development. And that is a specific site-by-site, proposal-by-proposal process where we look at what's best that's before us right now. I think it's really important, other people have referred to it, and Jim too, about how the density gets distributed throughout Newton. I would say it's not just Ward 3, but I think all of the north side wards, including parts of 1 and 2, little tiny bit of 4, tend to be already the denser parts. And I think it's important that we start to look at other parts of the city, South Side and Chestnut Hill, to help try and spread this out.
Okay.
So I don't think, just like everyone else said, there's a magic number. And it needs, if you're going to do some density, it needs to be reasonable, and you got to look at the whole city and see how it affects everything else. There are parts of Washington Street that should be developed. And there's other parts, for transit-oriented development we should have, but you need to look at the size and how that affects everything else. And for instance, the MBTA has come out, and a couple weeks ago they had a meeting at the library about increasing the capacity of the D line. They said that is not going to happen until 2040. That's 21 years from now. And yet we're proposing all this density at different T stations. This is something we need to consider and take a look at, and discussion with the MBTA to figure out a better plan for that.
Can I follow up with another question, partly addressed already by Andrea, but I want to, it's part of one of the questions, at least, that we've developed in putting these questions together, and it is many Newton residents are concerned about dense development, and it's concentrated in a few less wealthy areas of the city, while wealthier areas are largely left untouched. So what do you think is the best way to distribute development around Newton? So let's go back to you, Pam.
I agree that a lot of this density or new proposals are in the less wealthy areas. I also believe that it's too much, too big, too much infrastructure. Hello Washington Street, the proposal there of the vision plan has 2,500 new apartments in 2 miles. They had a expert come in and said that it's going to bring in 1,000 students in 2 miles, and we need a new elementary school. So if we're going to vote on this and agree to this, we need to have a plan. Yes, it's not going to happen next year. It's not going to happen in 5 years, but it takes time, and you need to have a plan. And the plan can change, but you can't think of it in a vacuum. And you need to look at other areas where it isn't as dense, and to spread development all over the city.
Okay. Andrea?
I think that planning is the key to answering this question. Some people who spoke before us talked about market forces driving this, and I don't think that that's an adequate answer, because we really need to get ahead of not responding to each proposal that comes before us by a developer. I feel that we are behind the ball, but trying to do this. We've recently, just since I've been on the council, had planning visions for both Washington Street and Needham Street, a Riverside vision plan. All of these need to fit into the context of the overall comprehensive plan. And until we start to look ahead and not just respond to, say, the Corf developments, but look at Newton Center, look at Wabun, look at other parts of the city and do vision plans for them too, we're not going to be able to have a comprehensive look that spreads this out.
Okay. Jim?
So in 2007, we came out with a comprehensive plan that was the first shot at putting everything together in the city. So this vision plan that has been spoken about today, and I guess in a variety of debates, is really about, the vision of going forward. But when I came on the city council, my point that I made real quick was the comprehensive plan was put together about 7 years before I came on the council. There was half the council had turned over since then. So any of these vision plans or anything else are just that they're a vision. And you need a vision because you have to have some kind of a guide to follow. But just because people think that someone's proposing 2,500 apartment units in a certain stretch of mileage or proposing certain heights, that there is no way that anybody can sit here and tell me it's going to happen, because we allow what to happen that we negotiate to happen. So the projects come into us and they look like one thing coming in, and we work on them until we get the correct project coming out. And that's the way we've been operating. And I think when we look at zoning and zoning issues currently right now, a lot of these things are in the works right now. And the committees are working on those, so the committees work on them, then it moves to the full council. So all of these things are still under discussion right now, but the way it is right now, we need vision plans so that we can have a guide, but the guide is not in cement.
Okay, let's turn to budget and finance, which may in fact cross-reference a little bit of what you just said. And that is, in 2007, Newton's Blue Ribbon Commission on the Municipal Budget recommended that Newton strengthen its commercial tax base, noting that commercial growth had been eclipsed by residential development. But since those findings were published, as I said, way back in 2007, Newton's commercial tax base has further declined. Do you agree with the Blue Ribbon Commission that Newton needs a stronger commercial tax base? And if so, what policies would you support to achieve that goal? Start with you, Jim.
First.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I think when you look at a commercial tax base, I think everybody would love to have a more balanced tax base, or even like the city of Waltham, which has an 80% commercial tax base. The residents there love that. I think we would like to do that, but the horse has left the barn in a lot of areas of the city of Newton, and that happened many years before this city council came on board. The decision was to stay in the residential mode. So fast forward to today, where we are and what we're dealing with, I think what we see today is that if commercial was viable and could be done, those people would be showing up at our door. So since they're not showing up at our door, we have a planning department, we have people at outreach, we look for business, but the reality is the projects we have before us now are the ones that are showing up in the city of Newton. We would love to have somebody come in and propose to redo some particular section of the city and say, look, we're going to take, and not that's going to happen, but just say Newton Marriott. We'd love to take the Newton Marriott grounds, turn it into a commercial center. It sits on 2 highways, a third is a state highway. It'd be a perfect location for a commercial center. But you know what? Nobody has come in and proposed that to us yet. So we get to work with what we have. So,
Andrea?
Definitely, I agree that we need to increase our commercial tax base and our commercial aspects of city life for both employment opportunities and to help offset our over-reliance on residential property tax. Jim points out one of the problems we've been seeing is that there are a lot of vacancies. Why is that? People don't want to come into some of the areas that are zoned commercial right now. One of the ways we're trying to help counterbalance that is through mixed-use development and have combinations of commercial, retail, and residential together in village-centered and transit-centered locations, and I think that's important. As I said, for both the employment and for the tax revenue, yes.
Okay, Pam?
I agree. We should increase our commercial tax revenue, and that will help the city more, but increasing that also brings in traffic. So you need to weigh those two parts and how to go about it. And what Jim said, the Marriott would be a nice location possibly for some commercial area. Some more at Wells Avenue down in that area. But it's a hard discussion that needs to be made because of the traffic issue.
Well, it's a bit of NIMBYism too, isn't there? Not in my backyard kind of problem.
Well, it's not just, I think it's not so much NIMBY, it's more that, if you're going to be sitting in traffic, most of us live right now near West Newton Square, and coming off of Watertown Street into West Newton Square is, 2, 3, 4 light cycles, and if you're going to add traffic there, it might be 8 or 10 light cycles. And
Yes.
that's the quality of life. It will affect your quality of life.
Andrea?
Just a quick point on that. I think that Wells Ave is actually probably not a good example to use because it's totally car-oriented, and we are trying to get people. I would say I'm in the middle of the spectrum of the councilors in terms of do we need cars or not. Yes, we still have cars. My goal is to reduce car trips. Wells Ave, part of that is perhaps if it gets rezoned to be a mixed-use area that can include residential. There was a residential proposal there years ago. I was opposed because that is not a walkable, accessible by public transportation site. That's actually an area I'd like us to look at when we're doing zoning redesign.
Jim, do you want to say something?
So Andrea had some good points there. So I just want to comment on your little comment about NIMBYism. I mean, there isn't a project. I was on land use for 4 years, and then in the last council changeover, Andrea took over as land use for our ward. So there's a ward rep from each one. And every project that comes before the city, whether it's a house, a porch, or whatever, somebody comes in to have a question or an issue about it. So it's a reality. There is never going to be a project ever established that someone's not going to have a problem with. We just have to deal with it, and we do deal with it. We negotiate with people, we discuss it, we try to go out there, we make the presentations, but NIMBYism is real. It's so real that it's not even worth discussing the terminology, because we just deal with those issues as they come up on each project.
Let's talk about the environment. And the question here, at least that I'm going to ask you right now, is do you support development that reduces the amount of green space in Newton? Specifically, do you support building the new Cal Senior and Community Centre in a city park? Jim?
I think my record is pretty clear on that one when we talk to Albemarle or any city park. I've proposed a whole different concept, and I know the mayor's kicked the can back and forth with me on this one, but I propose more of an Olympic Village concept for a new senior center. We, as a city, own a lot of assets. We have this great school here. Newton South has a lot of assets. We have new gymnasiums at a lot of the new elementary schools. We have a lot of facilities citywide, and with technology today, we can manage them from one refurbished senior center in Newtonville rather than trying to build a new supercenter somewhere else. So I do not support carving up Albemarle anymore. It's been carved up already for Pheasant, it's been carved up for Day, it's been carved up for Horace Mann. So I think at some point we got to start saying we got to maintain the parks the way they are and find other alternative locations for these type of facilities.
Andrea?
I agree with Jim, and I think I have a feeling we're all going to be on the same page about this. As soon as the short list came down to all publicly owned parks and playground areas, I said, oh no, it's coming to Albemarle next. I'm opposed to this. Not just because it's a NIMBY situation, because I live near there, but because I don't believe that we should be taking park and recreation land. Whether it was green space, which was not being proposed at Albemarle, that was going to be on supposedly just hard-surfaced recreational basketball and tennis courts. That is still taking away really important recreational aspects for the neighborhood users. So no, I don't think that we should do that. Did I miss the second part of your question? I'm sorry. I got off onto the new Cal.
Maybe it was
No.
new Cal. It's just green space generally.
Okay.
Yeah, and new
Well,
Cal
I do want to make,
specifically.
if I have a little more time, I would like to say the one thing that you get when you do compact, smart growth, transit-oriented development with a smaller footprint that sometimes maybe has parking below or goes up, is that frees up an opportunity to reclaim more green space, and we're seeing that as one of the positive things in the Northland development right now. It's going from being an expanse of 23 almost solidly paved acres to over 40% new proposed green spaces. So one advantage environmentally is sometimes to do denser development.
Okay, interesting, Pat.
I agree with the rest of these people that I don't believe that the senior center should be built on a park, and we should preserve what we have, and especially Albemarle, which is the most used city park. I think we need to take a look at this. There's other options, and I don't think a park is the right option. The Citizens Bank, maybe there's something that could happen with that in Newton Center, or some type of deal with that, or, people have discussed the triangle, but I think it needs to be relooked at again. We have I believe the 5th largest senior population and growing, and we do need a better, bigger senior center for them.
Sure. Okay. All right, we'll have to get somewhere where we have some good
I know.
debating points of contrast.
I don't think we actually all agree on everything. Let's get to it.
Okay. What do you disagree on? Well, okay. Affordable housing. Historically, housing developments with 50% or more affordable units were built in Newton in partnership with non-profit entities, including the Hamlet, Weeks House and Warren House. However, despite the availability of CPA funds, no such developments have been built in recent years, with all large projects being mostly market rate units. Do you support working with non-profits to build housing that is at least 50% affordable? Pam, let's start with you.
I think it's a great idea working with a nonprofit and adding much more affordable housing than what we're getting on these mixed-use developments now. We don't have enough affordable housing, but even what's quote, affordable, to me, it still seems very expensive. You know, a family of four that can't make more than, I believe, $67,000 for a two-bedroom at Austin Street is going to pay $1,758 a month, which is $20,000 a year out of that $67,000 salary, which, to me, that's not that affordable. And so we need to also promote naturally affordable, and also working with the nonprofit. We might be having even lower rates of rents, and so that more people can actually afford to live in Newton.
Who would take responsibility for that?
Well, a nonprofit, you know, and working with the city. So using some of our funds and helping buying a place, or maybe a church might be going closing, or other spaces that might come available, maybe the schools, the colleges, whatever, and working with the city and a nonprofit to get some areas to build to build affordable housing.
Okay. Andrea?
Well, definitely working with nonprofits is a good idea. The bulk of the housing, affordable housing we have in Newton, is a result of the work over many decades of the Newton Community Development Foundation and the Newton Housing Authority. And that has not been happening in recent years, and that is a financial issue about subsidies that are being offered. But I think we should absolutely continue to look into the overlapping public-private partnerships. I actually think that the city itself could take on a bigger role in leading this and see what are ways that the city of Newton could help develop. I'm not saying become an affordable housing developer, but set goals for this. Perhaps create a housing trust fund that could help with it. On your example, though, I think that the subsidized rates for at 80%, 100 are all set to be capped at 30% of the income. So if that was an income, I believe, for a family of four of something like $68,000 a year, $1,750 a month, I think, is within the reasonable 30 percentile, and that's what we're all expected to be able to pay up to for our housing.
Jim?
Yeah, thank you. So it's kind of my bailiwick here, using nonprofits and such. My background, I'm kind of considered the Forrest Gump of the city council. I've done a little bit of everything. I've been a little everywhere since joining the Marines. But one of the things I was on is I was on the board of Habitat for Humanity, and I was a development director, raising money for development for Habitat. And I've actually been out on the projects, swinging the hammer, putting the houses up, and doing that. So I believe in that heavily. So we had a little project back in Newton that was proposed probably in 2014 or 15 over on Rose Street, where they wanted to go to a 40B. That in discussions with the nonprofits in the city, we kind of established that it was like a very poor location to put people of lower income in affordable housing. It's sitting on the turnpike. It was in an industrial park. So we came out with a proposal to utilize a bunch of different nonprofit organizations in housing to put in more of a townhouse complex in there with 30-something units. It was so counter to what they were doing. They dropped their 40B proposal. Because of the price of the land and everything else, we weren't able to get the land secured to make that happen. But it's been one of the things I've been working with the current developers now to say, look, there's still the ability to do this. We can put small pocket-sized properties together that can never be expanded. And the mistake they made in Oak Hill was they put together property for the veterans, but they didn't limit them, so they allowed those houses to get overbuilt. But had they limited that property years ago, those houses would still be available and still be affordable.
Andrew, you want to come back?
I had a quick follow-up. The part of your question I realized just now we didn't address at all was the 50% figure. Mm-hmm. I think if we're talking about requiring 50% affordable housing, we're talking about unrealistic finances that are untenable for most developers. At first I thought I heard you at 15%, and I said, oh no, we're over that already. We're at 17.5, we're going to move up to 20. Mm-hmm. But a tipping point is created where you ask so much that the whole thing fails, and I think that's what we don't want to see, are expectations that lead to lack of success. I think 50% is way too high a number to require as affordable housing components.
Do you have any number that comes to mind before we move on?
Well, I'm happy we're aiming towards the 20, actually, and we've seen 25% now over at Austin Street, and that's pushing it. I see a counselor at the back who helped create that 25% of affordable housing. Higher? 23?
33.
33.
1/3.
Yeah.
Thank you,
And that was
former
Amy.
Alderman
Yeah,
Amy
that was Amy.
Sangiolo. But it set a precedent that's making it very hard for other developers to reach that threshold all the time. So I think that's about the max we could be at if you're looking for a number.
So the question was though for nonprofits, but I agree for commercial developers, they would not be able to make the 50%. But as a nonprofit, they're not worried about making the profits, just covering the costs. That yes, it could be 50%.
So I have to ask, in your answer, Andrea, you sort of gave the impression that we would just allow developers to produce whatever works for them financially. I mean, is that the bottom line here?
No, I'm sorry if I gave that impression. I'm very happy that we have created and upped our inclusionary zoning percentage, and I'm glad that we're moving that needle forward. And I think that we need to actually set numbers and not leave it to private development to say. I think that's something we want to say. We as a city say to developers rather than say, okay, we'll let you do whatever you want.
Thanks. Okay. Let's look at infrastructure, and I'm going to ask a very simple question about infrastructure, and that is, what are your top infrastructure priorities? So we can count to 10 and wait for you to think through them, or we can go straight to it.
Do you have any in mind that you want to go first?
Okay.
Jim.
So by infrastructure, let me clarify the question. Are you talking about particular infrastructure items that we have currently before us that we're working on? Or are you talking about
I think this is more like a vision statement.
Transportation, a vision?
What would be a vision statement of what a good infrastructure, or what a top infrastructure priority would be?
Okay, so that's a good, okay.
Plural,
Let me try and run with this a little bit. Okay, so the previous mayor, Seti Warren, did a nice job of putting together a priority list and trying to get organized and trying to say, okay, what do we need to get done? So we were able to get fire stations completed and items like that. Schools have been put on a plan, so we get the schools replaced. So those are infrastructure items. When we look at roads and such, so my big one, of course, is transportation, roads, and that type of infrastructure, because from West Newton to all over the city, there's definitely issues. I have a lot of people like send me pictures of their tires that are broken and, and cut open on various places. And so those are infrastructure. So I look at transportation. If we're looking at city buildings and things that we need to get done, we have totally put this police station up in the air. Nobody knows what to do with the police station. We're making proposals on it. We're trying to get this thing done. But it's been an item that's moved way up on the list to get completed, and it's moved way back. So it keeps bouncing up and down. So infrastructure-wise, I mean, transportation is key. City structures are key. Of the city structures, we need to stay on plan with the ones we have going on plan. So,
Andrew?
Well, I'm on the Public Facilities Committee, so when I think about infrastructure, I'm not thinking about
underground.
buildings, so I'm thinking about roads and sidewalks at the surface level. Number one, continue the accelerated roads program and continue to build more sidewalks to make it more pedestrian friendly and safe. 2, water, sewer, the underground infrastructure lines, continue the improvement we've been seeing in replacing and maintaining those over time. And the third one I'm thinking about is overhead utilities, and I would like to see us do much more undergrounding of overhead utilities. We would have seen a lot less power outages last week in our recent storm if we had more underground.
That's right.
That is an area where we are able to extract from developers to pay for that. It's very expensive for the city to pay to underground overhead utilities, but we're seeing it again at Northland, the offer of undergrounding utilities, which I think is a really good advantage, both visually and for safety reasons. So those are my 3.
Okay, thank you, Pam.
One thing I've been hearing from people that they complain about is the traffic, and especially if we're going to have more development, is traffic. And traffic, we need to lessen that, and so infrastructure-wise, working with the MBTA, with the trains and the T, and what we can do about that, and the roads and the stoplights and the timing of lights. Again, getting back to West Newton Square, most people who know that it's a real pain to get through. There's a proposal to update that, but it's the transportation and the traffic in the roads, and the flow of the traffic through the city too.
Jim, you want to come back?
Yeah, just a quickie on the West Newton Square. So West Newton Square is not a proposal; it's a project.
Yeah.
So it's underway. The initial planning it's been funded. It's been approved by the city council. So West Newton Square will see improvements starting in the spring. It was delayed a little bit because of the National Grid strike a few years back. We couldn't get the infrastructure of the underground done, so we had to wait for that to get resolved. But that, just a little comment. Pam's right. These work, but it's underway.
And traffic signalization coordination will be a part of that, as well as eliminating one of the way too many lights that go through the square.
Okay, let's turn to quality of life, something we're probably all interested in, and let's look at the traffic and public transit, which we've just been reflecting on a little bit. So for funding for actual improvements to public transit accessibility and service seems to be years away, if it comes at all. So do you think it's responsible for Newton's elected and appointed officials to approve high-density transit-orientated development projects in the absence of any actual improvements in public transit accessibility and service? Pam?
So for the MBTA on the D line, what they state is the next 5 years they're going to be making they have $913 million to make the T accessible and to improve the tracks, but they're not doing anything on the capacity. And they're going to have another set of Green Line cars, and then until the Type 10 cars, and it won't get full capacity to 2040. And the train, to make it accessible, we agreed upon a price to come up with a vision for that, a plan, but haven't decided about who's going to pay for what to make those accessible, which is $50 million. And to increase the capacity of the trains or the frequency of the trains, that's another $120 million to have platforms on both sides. So personally, I don't think the density that's proposed at these different transportation centers is the right way to go all at once. We need to maybe phase it to see if it's going to work instead of just building it and then let's figure out the problems afterwards. I'm an engineer from my education, and I'm all about plans. And plans do change, but we can't look at these in just a vacuum. And especially like the D line is if you're going to add all this people out on Riverside and on the west side, once it gets down to Newton Center or Chestnut Hill, it's going to be hard to get onto the train and also going in reverse direction.
Okay. Andrea?
There's a little bit of a chicken and egg thing happening with this, and DOT and the T tell us that they will not improve our service and capacity until we can prove that we have the ridership. That's what they say, particularly about the commuter rail line. So which comes first? Do we build the housing to say, look, now we have hundreds more people who need to take the T? I don't have an answer as much as I'm posing that as one of the dilemmas that we face. Specifically, when I think about proposals, for instance, the Washington Street Vision Plan, somehow a tall building down on the T commuter rail parking lot came before us without it being recommended by citizens as being at what point 10 stories, maybe now 6. A development, for instance, at that end of West Newton, if it's going to be transit-oriented until that commuter rail station is accessible, until both lines are working, would not make sense to me, and I would not approve doing a whole new transit-oriented development that is not actually transit-oriented.
Okay. Jim?
So I think we have to look at the big picture now. We still got the old-fashioned focus on the city of Boston, whereas everybody's building up and down 128, for newer people 95. But so you have a lot of people today that aren't necessarily going to Boston. They either stay at home, work at home, or they're heading west. They're going out up and down 128. Waltham's built 3 or 4 new towers just in the last year alone. So, and with those towers comes people. So a lot of the people that will be renting in Newton and buying in Newton won't actually be working in Boston. So to put all our focus on the D line, this line, whatever line, saying they're all going downtown, we have to actually address how do we get the people to the west of the city. And that's one thing that we have to look at. Now, one of the things that we've done in the city council, and I heard one of the earlier councilors say in another debate, is we focused a lot on driving down the vehicle traffic on new projects. And that's through shuttles, and those are ongoing now. So we have ambitious projects right now. I sit on the Public Safety and Transportation Committee, whereas somebody like TripAdvisor or stuff, rather than move their employees to our city individual cars, they run buses and shuttles out of Cambridge. They run direct runs. We have some that pick up at the different T stations and bring them right to their facilities. So I can see that we can't delay development because we can't, like the chicken and egg. I agree with that. You know, we got to build this. They told us we're not building it. We're not giving you trains until you give us people. But so we're putting the people together with positive plans to move them to and from their workstations and wherever that may be, east or west. Thank you.
I think it raises a very good question about whether or not you'd all be confident that the capacity exists within the planning departments and the other departments of the council to actually bring these kinds of things to fruition, these kinds of relationships that'll make these transport and infrastructure programs more effective.
See, the city council is very challenged. We don't have a staff. We're part-time. So a lot of what we have to do, we have to rely on the city administration to come down with, and state organizations and federal organizations. So we take that data, we have to look at it, we have to take it apart, we have to make sure it's actually real. But if the city council has some kind of a staff, which would be, it'll never happen, so it's not worth talking about, but all this data and all the stuff that we work with, we have to kind of believe the planning department. Now, we don't necessarily believe them, it wasn't born yesterday, so I'm not going to believe when they come in with a package that's going to be the package that solves all our problems. But we do have to start somewhere. We start with the administration, and then we work from that point. That's the only thing we can do.
Just to follow up, we do rely on the information from the planning department, from the engineering department, and from the law department. None of them work for the city council. They do all work for the mayor. As we've all seen, they've also hired some outside consultants and demographers, and not everyone has had confidence in the results of those reports. Right now, the planning department really is facing a staffing shortage because we've just lost or about to lose the second of two really excellent staffers. So maybe things will change as they staff up. Who knows who will be hired? In the past, I've always had a lot of credibility in planning department reports. Haven't necessarily felt that way since I've been in office.
All right, slightly disturbing comments, I think, but let's move on to another quality of life question. This is about seniors, and what would you do to improve the quality of life for Newton seniors? Pam?
Well, first, I think a larger, newer senior center. Our senior population, like I said, is growing, and it's large. I don't know, it's 20-25%, something like that. Might be even higher of the Newton population. And along with the new senior center, additional services that might be able to help them stay in their homes, and coordinating with the schools, and helping out in their houses. And I was just thinking today when I woke up, there's a light bulb out in my bedroom light, and I don't like ladders. And I'm thinking 20 or 30 years from now, definitely I won't be changing that light bulb. And you don't want to call a handyman to come in just for that, but to have those type of services for seniors that are free or very reduced, that would help. And also the transportation that they're providing right now throughout the city, they just rolled out, and I think that's something to continue with too.
Andrew?
On the light bulb issue, the changing of the light bulbs, the ride to the doctor's appointment, we have a really great program here in Newton called Newton at Home, which does exactly that sort of thing. They provide company rides, someone to play cards, someone to pick up groceries for you. That kind of thing, I think, really helps people stay in their homes. Two other things we're already doing that help people stay in their homes. There is a tax deferral program that we have, so that as you get older and find it harder and harder to pay your real estate taxes, there is a deferral program for that. The ride program, the new Pro, I haven't tried it yet. That helping people get around within the city is really a positive. I think accessory apartment ordinance was an important way of letting people stay in their home if they choose to do it that way. Those are all ongoing things. I don't know what else we can do, but I think augmenting all of those and making sure they stay in place is really important. There are going to be a lot of us seniors in the next decade here. We're going to be well over a third of our population. And we don't want to just, I think more housing too, just more housing at different income levels will help us stay here.
Okay, Jim?
Yeah, so I agree with the housing issue. So my wife and I have 10 children between us. So how the quality of life, I'm a senior, so the quality of life would be to have more housing so we can move some of these children out to their own locations. So that would be of high priority for my quality of life. So I think when we look at that, I agree Andrea's point. We do a lot of things right now for the seniors. We have a lot of activities, not just activities, but we have a lot of services for them right now. Some could be enhanced. I think we're relatively proactive at going out to asking the seniors what they need and what's the next thing. And senior center came up with an item. So the senior center item was one of these things that, okay, we need a new senior center. Well, we need to increase that because we need to consolidate services better into one location possibly, but we can do that from an administrative perspective. Do we need to do it from an infrastructure buildings perspective? That may not necessarily be true, but the seniors at Newton have done a great job. They built the best education system in the country, basically. And I think because of that now we're addressing their issues going forward, but they're very smart and very wise. We're in that category that they see what they want and they're proactive. They come to us. It's a very active electorate. So we see the senior citizens all the time. So we're on top of their quality of life issues.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's move to this category of activity where we start to wind up, and that is to each of you to ask one question of each other.
Okay.
So
Each other or just one person?
one person, yes. So Jim, who would you like to ask a
I
question?
asked Pam. So this has been kicked around a little bit about the budget and building things, and everybody's talking about the city expanding. So it comes down to taxes, and it comes down to tax overrides and tax benefits and such. Under what circumstance would you go for a tax override?
So I don't believe in a tax override for just normal expenses for the city. It has to be for a very specific thing. So possibly a new senior center, for a specific school. But for general funds, no. We need to learn to live within our means. And it's going to be hard choices. So one thing is the $1 billion liability, the pension and retirement insurance. And we're going to be paying $33 million a year, and it increases $9.6 million. Our revenues are only increasing $3.4 million. At some point, something's going to have to give. And I don't think an override is the way to do it, but we're going to have to make hard choices.
So the circumstances would be?
For specific projects.
Projects specific.
Yes. And then it depends what that project is.
Want me to ask Andrea now, or waiting on the turn?
Well, what do you
Want me
think?
to ask her? That's okay.
Yeah.
Oh, you ask-
Andrea, you ask a question
Okay,
of whomever you'd
No,
like.
it's okay.
okay, that's what I thought we were doing.
Yes.
So Pam, I'm not trying to target you, but you're the new one here, and I kind of know how this guy feels about stuff so far. So as I understand a really important part of your message, it's about retaining neighborhood character. So I would love for you to define for us all what neighborhood character is, and what are the specific methods or tools you would use to maintain or protect that?
So it's not so much maintaining character. I don't want huge density in neighborhoods. And it should be well thought out where the density is going to go. The proposed zoning for next year, for the city zoning, one of the things which I'm having problems with is the proposed cluster housing. And with cluster housing, I do have some numbers here, but in cluster housing, and this would be almost anywhere in the city, that someone could buy up adjacent lots, and for apples to apples comparison, they could, I used an acre, and an acre is what, 42,000 square feet. And cluster housing, depending if you're in a R1, R2, or R3, if it's perfectly shaped and meet all these other requirements, in a R1, which is kind of like West Newton Hill, you would be allowed to build 10 1,800 square feet houses on an acre lot. In an R2, it would be 14 3,000 square foot, 2.5-story homes on an acre lot. And in R3, it would allow 18 3,600 square foot, 3-story, 2 families. To me, and that can be done anywhere in the city in these cluster homes, that is really going to change the neighborhood and the feel of the neighborhood and the density. And this is something I think we should increase density, and I think we should increase density throughout the city. But what is proposed right now, and I don't think this is what's actually going to happen, but that's what's in there right this moment, I think this is too much. And I would like to see it much, much less than what this is.
Okay, would you like to ask a question of one of the other panellists?
Okay.
Give you a second to catch your breath.
Andrea. So in Avalon, in the Newton Highlands, they paid $876,000 in taxes, plus 1% in community preservation. And they had 107 students last year, and that resulted in the city of Newton costing $1.9 million. So they paid $876,000 in taxes, and it's costing $1.9 million to educate those students. And it's by a big company with an apartment complex there. Developments of this density will actually cost the city more for education and infrastructure than we will make back in tax revenue. Do you see this as a problem? And if so, what do you think should be done about it?
Yeah, I don't really like that project. And I'm glad to say I wasn't on the council when it was approved. I think two things about that. One is it's all 100% residential with no commercial or retail or office. And I think that would have been an improvement to do a mixed-use project rather than 100% housing there. The other part, I have difficulty with the argument about people worrying about educating children who might move into Newton. For me, that is a no discussion item. If children move into Newton, it is our obligation to educate them. We want families to move into the city. We don't want to become just an aging population. If I listen to the demographers that I say we're not all sure we trusted those figures, it looks like the enrollment projection is lowering at the same time as the new residential projections are increasing, where they believe we're not going to have an overcrowding or an increased student population as a result of that. And as Jim said, without our own staff, I do so far have to believe in those numbers. So I think we've got to educate kids who move here, and I think more commercial and mixed-use development helps offset the problems that you point out.
Okay, I just want to say one thing. So I did talk to the demographer after he gave his presentation that said our population isn't, our school population isn't increasing, so all these developments are good. I asked him, which I knew the answer because he didn't have that information, have you looked at the data about the developments on Washington Street? And he said no. And I said, would that change your answer? And he said yes. And I think, yes, we should educate everybody who comes here, but we need to take a look at what the cost is, and we need to budget it accordingly.
Well, beyond the cost, what I see happening potentially in West Newton Square is, even if the numbers are equalized, and I've talked to some school committee members about this, the word we don't like to use anymore, redistricting, there's another word for it apparently that's less offensive to most people, is going to occur. And neighborhoods and groups of kids and families and communities are going to be changed and disrupted as a result of that. And that is something I think we really do have to think about. I said, what if all these units do go into West Newton Square? Are those kids going to go to Horace Mann or Franklin or Pearson? The school committee member said to me, no, we'll probably bus them to Mason Rice. And I thought, really? Is that a good solution? Is moving kids from, say, West Newton would go to 4 different schools? So that is something I think we do have to grapple with, is where will these students go? But the fact that we want them and we will educate them is a non-starter for me.
Okay, let's go to our final statements, and it's just going to be, let's try and restrict ourselves to 2 sentences.
Two
sentences?
That's a good idea.
That's what I thought.
Woo. Wow.
Okay, Jim, let's start with you.
Sentences.
Yeah. Thank you very much for everybody that organized this debate. So I guess that's one sentence.
All right, two
So
starting
I got a
now.
couple of my own. Okay. So I think what we've shown in the debate for the Councilor-at-Large from Ward 3 is that the incumbents are doing the job because there's not a lot of disagreement here. So when I look at that, the perspective, say we're not disagreeing on a lot of things. We agree with that there's going to be proposed housing. We agree that there's going to be things to look at. There's projects that we have to take apart. There's projects we have to do a lot of things with. So I asked for you to vote on November 5th because I think I had a lot of value to the residents. And I think I had a lot of negotiating skills and my ability to see the good and the bad and what's hiding in the middle for the residents. So once again, I do amazing client services, constituent services. They come to me, things get resolved, and I'd ask you to vote for me on November 5th.
Andrea?
More than 2 sentences.
I know, I couldn't,
he had
semicolons.
semicolons. He had semicolons and commas in there.
Okay. I'm still a
Good
new
3.
counselor, so I'm not one of the entrenched, we need to get rid of you people who doesn't. I haven't lined up with people. I don't do clique pack thinking. I am a multi-issue person who has a lot of background with many, many varieties of issues in Newton through my 30 years of being a resident and activist. And I'm also not someone who thinks I know better than other people, and I don't think I have the answer. So I listen and I collaborate and I work well with others, and I think that's a really important attribute to have in an elected official.
Pam?
Thank you very much for this debate. And as an engineer, I think of the big picture. I love data. I love reading vision plans. I'm a visual thinker. I think this all brings a different perspective to the counselors. And I think I have a different vision from my other counselors, and I hope that you will vote for me on November 5th.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for your contributions. And that's it.